get more from the shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who's joining us. What's Labour going to do about all this?
Well, it's a desperate situation, and I think the scale of casualties in Gaza, civilian casualties, including children, are unacceptably high. The scenes that we're seeing emerging from Gaza are deeply distressing, and that's why Keir Starmer is doing exactly what he would be doing if he was Prime Minister, which is coordinating with international allies to look at what we can do in the immediate term to get aid in and to get civilians out of harm's way through humanitarian pauses.
French have called for a ceasefire.
Well, I listened to what President Macron said over the weekend. I think he was calling for, I think, an extended pause. I think he's talking about a number of days. We've seen similar calls from international NGOs. It's not quite the same
so you would support that?
A ceasefire. I think we do need to allow sufficient time. The problem with these 4-hour pauses that we're seeing, it's just not sufficient time to get aid in and to get civilians out of harm's way. The challenge with a ceasefire is that it can't be imposed by the international community. It has to be negotiated between Israel and Hamas. And given Hamas have said they will repeat the 7th of October atrocity again and again until Israel is destroyed, and Israel has said, well, we're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to take out Hamas. It's hard to see how in the immediate future there's a ceasefire, and that's why the focus of many in the international community has been on humanitarian pauses so that we can get aid in and civilians out of harm's way, at the same time as there are serious efforts behind the scenes through diplomatic back channels to try and bring about a political process to end the conflict and deliver the state of Palestine we all want to see alongside the state of Israel.
But we can acknowledge, can we, that 4-hour windows are not long enough?
I think so, and that's certainly what aid agencies are telling us, and we ought to listen. And I'm afraid to say, when you see the scale of civilian casualties, particularly children, these are unacceptably high. No medic should be practising in a hospital without power. No medic should be practising in conditions where they're surrounded by the military. I recognise that for Israel it's fiendishly difficult because Hamas uses innocent people as human shields. It uses facilities like hospitals as protection. So it is difficult, but that's why Israel's got to act with responsibility and proportionality in terms of how it conducts this war.
Do you think they are?
War crime. I think these things need to be investigated. And I'd say to Israel, we support what they are trying to do in terms of taking out Hamas and degrading their capability.
If I may, only because
but they've got to act
we had a technical
proportionally.
issue then, so we couldn't hear what you were saying. But our microphones are back now, so that's good. And I did put to you that whether Israel had been acting proportionally. And
I think there are serious questions about that at this stage, frankly. We've seen, I'd argue, a disproportionate number of civilian casualties, particularly children. We've seen serious allegations of the use of white phosphorus, which is itself a war crime and ought to be investigated. And we've got, as you know, that report showed harrowing scenes from hospitals in Gaza, which is why Keir Starmer has prioritised with international allies the importance of getting aid in and people out of harm's way.
It looks very likely that an SNP amendment calling for a ceasefire will be selected for a vote this week by the Speaker. Will Labour be whipping MPs in order to vote in the way that the leader wants them to? Well,
that's a decision for Keir Starmer and the Chief Whip, and we'll no doubt have a shadow cabinet discussion tomorrow morning. I don't want to preempt the Speaker. He makes his own decisions about what amendments are selected. All I would say to colleagues in Parliament, whichever party they're in, is it's all very well calling for a ceasefire, but what are the means to bring it about? What are the circumstances that they can see that I can't, where Israel and Hamas, against this backdrop, sit down and negotiate a ceasefire? And it's very easy in politics to try and please the crowd. We've got to come up with serious solutions that protect civilian lives and build the essential political process needed to bring about a state of Palestine and an end to this cycle of violence we've seen over decades now in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
What's Labour going to do by the end of the day if Suella Braverman's still in post?
Well, I think it's a question for what will the Prime Minister do, because he appointed Suella Braverman as Home Secretary only 5 days after she had been forced out for a national security breach. He knew that she wasn't up to the job when he made the appointment to a crucial office. He's keeping her on now for the same reason, which is he's weak. And he's a prisoner of the right wing of his party. And he's putting his party before the country because her conduct as Home Secretary in recent days has been an absolute disgrace, undermining the police, undermining law and order, giving encouragement to this idea that the cenotaph was under threat from a protest that was taking place miles away from Hyde Park to the US Embassy. And why? Because she's attention-seeking, she's running a leadership campaign, and Rishi Sunak is too weak to stand up to her. And I think it is, frankly, a disgrace that just as Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy last year, Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman are crashing public confidence in law and order. And I think it's one of many reasons why she should go and one of many reasons why Rishi Sunak is unfit to be our Prime Minister and a general election can't come soon enough.
Well, he would say, I'm guessing if he was sitting here, that he's pretty well aligned on lots of points with her. He doesn't necessarily agree with what she did last week, but more generally, he's quite aligned with her policies.
Well, it's not me he has to convince about that. It's Home Office sources that today, this morning, described Number 10 as clowns, according to George Parker of the Financial Times. It's not the Labour Party that's sticking two fingers up to Rishi Sunak. It's Suella Braverman when she published that piece in the Times, even after Rishi Sunak and his team said, oh, it can't go out like this. This is incendiary language. You've got to tone it down. She just said, well, I'm going to get on with it anyway. That's the lack of respect she has for Rishi Sunak. That's the weakness that she smells from Number 10. And he's letting her get away with it. And look, the politics aside, the real problem here is that we've got a Home Secretary who is unfit for office, enabled by weak leadership from the Prime Minister. And that is a real problem when she is actively undermining the police, who have a difficult job to do. And let's not forget, 9 of their police officers were injured on Saturday, a number of them hospitalised. It is a total disgrace. And the Home Secretary couldn't find the words to support the police and to deplore those injuries until the next day. It is an absolute dereliction of duty. I need to get you to cool your jets because I need you to come back onto topic as far as your brief is concerned. The NHS, of course, 2 million extra hours of NHS, out-of-hours appointments, I should say, for the NHS a year. Isn't that what you've already told us previously? Yes, it's the policy we announced at the Labour Party conference. We are highlighting that policy again today in light of the figures that we've got from the government through written parliamentary questions that show there are now fewer procedures being performed now than there were pre-pandemic. So things are getting worse rather than better. Rishi Sunak has waved the white flag on his pledge to cut waiting lists, acknowledging that the NHS is now having to go slower because of the challenges in the system, challenges that have been 13 years in the making.
Doctor strikes didn't help.
No, they haven't, which is why it's even more irresponsible that the Prime Minister didn't sit down to negotiate. He's made the same mistake he did with the nurses. Remember, back in December, the nurses said before they went on strike, we'll call off these strikes, but you've got to sit down and negotiate with us. And the government said, well, we're not doing that. And they tried to tough it out. The strikes went on, appointments were cancelled, patients were miserable. And in the end, the government reached a negotiation. Then it happened all over again with the doctors. We're not going to sit down. We're not going to negotiate. Appointments cancelled. Patients experiencing inconvenience. And what's the government doing now? Trying to sit down and negotiate a deal. If only they learned from their own mistakes, that would be some improvement. But I think their time's up now. That's why we need a general election and a Labour government to get the NHS back on its feet and fit for the future.
We are out of time. Apologies again for our technical glitch. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.